there, my friends! Happy Tuesday and welcome back to the world of creativity. So we're going to be talking about fiction again today, because that is one of the topics I love discussing on this channel whenever I can, if it makes sense, if I got some sort of theme to put forward. So we're talking about writing, characters, storytelling. I'm all about that stuff. As you folks may or may not know, I've been writing as a sincere passion for 10 years, but technically I have roots going all the way back to elementary school, kindergarten even, but 2015 was like the year that I solidified creation and writing as a lifestyle. So anyways, I was on the Uber drive back home from work today, and there was one particular character that I had rolling around in my head, and we'll get into her more detail when I get into the body of this little video essay, I suppose. But the more I was thinking about this character, the more I started thinking about the other characters that I've developed. And one common theme that I've realized, as different and multifaceted as they are, I started to realize just how interesting the process of creating a character is. In that after you create a character, a person with a story who doesn't exist, you look back on what you've made and you actually start to learn a lot more about yourself. And I found that really fascinating. I guess another way to say that is one philosophy that I've really operated by is from a brief dialogue that we had in the movie Ex Machina, a really great movie if you haven't seen it, where effectively there's this almost Steve Jobs-ish kind of guy who is creating artificial intelligence, and he has a Jackson Pollock painting in his abode. And he basically says, when Jackson Pollock made a painting, just throwing paint right at the canvas, it wasn't because there was a specific image that he had in mind. Simply, he wanted to slap color on the wall and figure out what it meant afterwards. And I really took that to heart, and that's really what informs me whenever I'm writing a story, creating a character, or even just writing a piece of poetry. I just simply have an idea, I run with it without a true mission more often than not, and then I see what it means afterwards, then I dissect it. So all that being said, what I plan to do is I have physical manifestations of 5 characters I've created over the years, and I'm going to talk about who they are and what they mean to me, and maybe I'll give you an idea of what sort of characters you can create if that's the sort of thing that you'd like to get into. So anyways, all that being said, let's get started with the first character that I was thinking about today. The latest and greatest addition to my collection of many characters. I'm not kidding you, I've made a lot of characters. I'm not shitting you, I've made a fuck ton of characters. This one has interesting origins because it started as simply an object, and then it became an actual full-fledged character in recent weeks, days even. So anyways, I got a really cool mask from the local Walgreens. It was just a skull, really plain, really boring, but as I do, if I get something that's boring but I see potential in it, I trick it out and I make it cool. So I painted it, I gave it a hood, I screwed nails in it to create this little number. This is what I call the death metal mask, at least initially, but now there's more context that goes into it. Even here, I love this right over here, this eye. I made that from actual scrap metal I found walking up and down the street. It's like a washer or something. I spray painted it in red and I glued it into the inside of the mask, so it looks like we've got some asymmetry. As you notice, we also have the big Anarchy A displayed on the entire mask. The silver is all mine too. I did that from scratch. So yeah, I really love this mask, and I kind of just had it as part of my collection, but didn't really mean anything until recently. As I mentioned in a few of these videos, I'm currently working on, after 10 years of writing, my first full-fledged novel, Step Apex Rising, where it's about a cult. Without getting too spoilery, it's about a group of people in a really terrible city who want to make a difference. And a big aesthetic of mine since, like, I'd say elementary school, is I love masks. I mean, henceforth, the death metal mask that we have right here. So I made this mask, and ever since I customized it, I'm like, oh yeah, this is going to be part of the Xamus mythos. It's probably going to be a good look for a character one day, should I develop them. So as I was writing my story, I figured, you know what, let's take this thing and actually turn it into a full-fledged character. So I had a little bit of a bio kind of floating around, not to be part of the novel, but to one day become something later down the line. But then I realized as I was writing the story, wow, she could actually fit in here. So she wound up being a full-fledged character. So this mask now has a full sketch to go with her. So you'll see that right here. Her name is Shada, and effectively, as I've been characterizing her over time, adding more to who she is, she's a full-blown anarchist. She moved to this city in search of a better life for herself. But then when she got there, she became disillusioned. She realized just how crap the other side of the pond could be in this fictionalized world that I've built. So therefore, she takes up anarchy. She hates establishments. She loves herself some explosives, and she's got a total sailor mouth, probably the most vulgar and wretched of all the characters in this story, which is saying a lot if you know anything about Step Apex Rising. And as I've developed this character, I just really fell head over heels for the character development, wanting to learn more about them. I even have plans of looping her into stories I've written in the past that need a little bit of a revamp. I think she might fit very seamlessly into there, just as a background character, not to totally overhaul the plot, but she'd be right at home with characters that I've made years ago, and she's only several months old character-wise. So yeah, this is a really interesting character that I'm loving the development process of. But again, another part of this video is not just simply telling you how I come up with characters, how I made them, etc., etc., but also what they mean to me. This character wasn't created totally from scratch psychologically. She does have inspirations going into her. Again, kind of going back to those anarchistic propaganda roots that she has on full display with her character. I was thinking a lot about one of my favorite video games of all time being Watch Dogs 2, which is basically about a group of hackers who are in like this mildly dystopian San Francisco, and they're hacking like these big billboards of propaganda, and they're putting up like all these skulls and profanities up there and stuff like that. And I was like, I want to have a character that kind of embodies that psychology of just taking down the man, destroying the government, F all, basically. And that's what this character represents. I love that a lot. But one of the things that the game taught me, that I didn't really realize until I made this character, is the fact that video games and stories, especially if you're kind of a loner like myself, they kind of teach you what sort of friends you'd like to have. Shada doesn't exist. She's a mask, she's a drawing right now, and she's appeared in one single scene in the novel as I'm writing it at the moment. But as I'm writing her, I'm realizing a lot of the characters I make, I'd love to know some of these people. I'd love to just bump into them and join up with them and see what kind of damage we can cause, you know what I mean? Or build something amazing. But on the other side of the coin, when you're writing a story, you also have antagonists, you have villains. And as you're writing them, you're also thinking, these are the types of people I'd absolutely hate if I found them in the wild. Or this character that I've made, they're a big representation of this person that I knew 15 years ago or whenever. So I just find that really interesting. Again, kind of going back to that Pollock philosophy, you don't know what a character really means until after you've made them, until you've solidified their story. So as for Shada over here, I started to really think about this character and like, what does she mean to me? And she's a representation of the types of people I'd love to stumble upon in the world, the friends I'd like to make. Totally different from me, same ideology, sure, but she expresses them in a much more extreme and destructive way. So obviously, would I want her to actually be real and do what she does in the book? No, she'd have an insane criminal record, but in the world she is in, if I were there with her, we'd have a gas. We'd have some drinks. It would be fun to run around. But yeah, that's Shada. Not a whole lot else to say about her because, again, she's brand spanking new, which is kind of the cool thing. It's like a factory of characters over the last decade. So now we're going to go into 4 more characters I have, which are like legacy characters, deep cuts, way back when. I'm not sure what order I'm going to do these in. They're not going to be in chronological order of creation. Just whatever makes sense on a whim. So let's move on to the next one. Now let's pull in one of, I'm not kidding, like 30 puppets I've made over the last 10 years. This is one of the only ones that's on string. This is number 4. I think I made him in 2014, maybe? 2015? So around the Renaissance, as I like to call it, when those 10 years started. This is Mr. Rotten. He is, again, number 4 of the puppets I've made. He is quite old, maybe a decade old, maybe a little older. And this is, again, same with the Pollock principle, right? As I guess I'll call it. I just made him because I wanted to make him. Didn't have a story in mind. Didn't have any idea of what I could do with him as far as storytelling is concerned. I didn't even know what I'd be naming him until after I made the guy. But yeah, he's called Mr. Rotten, and over time I've slowly started to weave him into the greater narrative of my stories. I think I should mention all of my stories are connected in a single universe. It allows them to be more conformed and have a little chemistry with each other and some poetry. But that being said, I structure it in a way where you can read almost any story as a standalone. So the puppets are interesting. Again, I didn't have a story about them until later on, but Mr. Rotten is like the pinnacle of them. Effectively, what each puppet represents is a child. This gets really grim and dark, as many of these characters do. Each puppet represents a child who died in a tragic way, and then their spirit was captured by another character that I could talk about another time, called the Imp, and they're effectively trapped in his own pocket dimension called the Otherworld, which is effectively this world's version of hell. But it's not something that's like under the earth or inside of it. Rather, it's whole other dimension beyond. And when you're in Otherworld, for lack of a better term, you're not walking on the outside of a sphere. Rather, you're trapped inside of a sphere. So you could literally look straight up, and you're looking at the other side of the world. The terrarium loops all the way around to meet itself again, and you're trapped in that sphere. So that's kind of fun. But as for the puppets, basically the Imp has this big maniacal scheme to create his own undead army to overthrow the creators of the universe. That's a whole other tangent. More so the creators of the world. I won't get that ambitious. There's another character who we will be talking about later in this video who teams up with the puppets who are not so corruptible, and they work together to free everyone from the other world, get back to Earth, at least the ones that are still not mentally too far gone, and try and resume their lives. So Mr. Rotten, he's basically the helmsman of all the puppets, so he leads himself and all the other undead children back to the Earth, and pretty much it's a little bit of a kind of a side story, a little bit of a kickaway, where all the puppets kind of, after they do everything they need to do to help out their buddies and stuff like that, they seek refuge in a little log cabin somewhere off in the woods, and they actually start realizing that they have mystical, almost cartoonish-like powers. So they start living in a little city built of cardboard boxes and things like that. So they cut out the windows, they use trash to build statues and stuff like that. So they build their own little culture, right? And till the end of the world, basically, they're living their own little happy life, because they're basically immortal. So I really like that concept, that each puppet has their own little tragic backstory, but they come back around in that they become a bright spot within this little puppet city that's in the basement of this abandoned cabin. Each of them has a role to serve. They each have a job. They each have their own personality, their own abilities, their powers, their own intelligence. I'm thinking none of them talk. They're mute completely. So they interact through movements and noises, and that's all they got. So the reason why I think the puppets matter so much to me is, again, I didn't realize this until after the fact. Firstly, they're a love letter to the Max Fleischer cartoons. Growing up, I was not a Disney kid at all. I was not raised on Mickey Mouse. I was not raised on Lion King. I had to discover those things a little later and why people love those so much. I didn't watch Lion King until 8th grade when the teacher turned it on for us for some reason. Don't remember what the occasion was. But I was a Max Fleischer kid, so Betty Boop, Felix the Cat. I don't remember if Popeye's under that banner or not, but, there's like a whole umbrella of characters that fit under the Max Fleischer banner. And I fell in love with the art style, the music, the swing, the crude humor. I just love that absolute bliss that world created. And it's just nice to have that as an aside point in this fictional world that I made for myself, which is very glum, very dark, very unforgiving for a lot of the characters who are there. So that's one of the reasons why I love the puppets. They're a love letter to the cartoons I grew up with. And secondly, I guess it's another conduit through which I could say I love seeing people of different backgrounds being able to come together and make each other's lives better, no matter how bad their pasts have been. Again, that kind of goes back to Shada with Examus. We'll talk about a little later with another character I've got slated out over here. So, yeah, that's pretty much it. I really love puppets. If you're wondering how I make them, I haven't made one in a while just because they take up a lot of room and a lot of resources. For the most part, there's some exceptions. They're made of Model Magic clay and paper clips. And that's it. I think I know who makes sense as the third one over here. This is technically the oldest character that I have to show you today. And I think the oldest character that I am operating with currently that isn't totally retired. Again, like Shada, this started as just an object, but this character took over a decade to get a story. So I'm just going to show you right now. I won't mince words. Many of you might have seen this already. This is the Apexamus mask, or the Steppenwolf mask, or the Step mask. He is the main subject of the novel that I'm currently writing. This mask is highly customized, repainted, restuffed. I think it's retired. I don't think they make this specific mask anymore. But this is one of my prized objects. Like, if you had to just took a hammer to everything I own, I could only save 5 things, that mask would be one of them easily. That mask has a really fun story. This is one of the only items I've ever begged my parents to get me. I was in like this little Halloween outlet, and I begged my dad to get me this mask for some reason. I just knew that I couldn't leave the store without it. I was like first grade, second grade, young. I really don't remember how old I was. But eventually he caved and he got it for me. And it was weird, because as much as I loved the mask, I kept losing track of it. Every time, like, gee, where did that mask go? It was in the attic, it was downstairs in the laundry, it was in my bedroom. It kept hopping around. I don't know why, I just couldn't keep track of the damn thing. And then one day I'm like, oh, I want the damn mask, I want to keep it. So finally I snatched it, and I kept it. And I wanted to be sure I never lost it again. Over time I started modifying it, painting it. I added new cloth lenses in the eyes so that we could see out of it better. I gave it a full overhaul over time. It's barely recognizable to how it originally was, if you can even find any original copies of it. But slowly over time, it became symbolic. We could go on a whole rabbit hole with this, guys. You have no idea. I had this mask all the way up through high school, and I've told you a little bit about high school. I became a very angsty and angry teen. I hated everything. And that's also where I started writing philosophy for the first time. Again, philosophies I would not endorse now because they were so filled by rage, so misinformed. But through that, I almost started creating this character who went by different names at the time, and this was the face of that character. No story, they were kind of just a mascot of that anger that I was harboring at the time, because I had a really horrible teacher. Everybody gave me a lot of trouble, and I don't know why. High school was just a bad environment for me. So then I got to college, and then I started, creating more interesting characters like Mr. Rotten, 2 other characters we're going to be talking about. Then it leads to the modern day, where I'm working on Shada and other characters of that nature. But the thing about the Apexamist, he didn't get a full story until I started interning in Boston midway through college. The thing about the Apexamus, I wasn't really sure what setting to put him in. There was a time where he'd go up in a mountain with a monk and start learning things. There was even a time where he'd go to college. I had some stupid ideas for this character who's supposed to be very dangerous, very brooding, almost like a Batman type, but he does not have the no-kill rule. And there's a lot more differences that separate him. But I started interning in Boston, and I loved the job there, and I loved sitting there doing my work and all that. The one thing that I hated, though, was going in and out of the city. I despised it. It was crowded. It was loud. It was bright. It was crazy. And I hated that. But while I had spare time at my internship, I was able to kind of just scribble down some notes, do some quick little sketches to be like, in what world would the Apexamus live? And that's when I created an anagram for Boston, and it became Brostum. That is the city that the Apexamus and the other Examus inhabit in this novel that I'm working on today. It took that long. I got the mask in early elementary school, started really enjoying it in high school, played with ideas in college, but I didn't have the foundation for the actual story he'd be in until midway through college. And as of this year, I'm finally working on the novel. So, goes to show you, if you have just a little flash of an idea, don't throw it away, keep it. You never know when you finally have the right resources necessary to build it out into something meaningful. And I think that's one of the biggest stories I could tell with this character, even with the novel currently being incomplete. I already know how it ends, but I have an outline and everything. But this is one of those stories where I always knew that I wanted a story to exist around this character, but I needed more experiences to inform what that story would be. I needed to learn more about people, more about philosophy. There's even some religious themes that are also tied into the story. This entire book ties together everything that I've learned thus far. It's going to be my penultimate project. if I ever get around to finishing it. I'm like committed. That's a crazy thing. Like in the last 10 years, I've been hopping from project to project. This is the first year when I'm like, tunnel vision, this is my thing, this is what I'm working on. And it feels so damn good. So yeah, that's pretty much what this character and this story represents. Being able to discipline myself, settle on a theme, settle on a character, but at the same time, using all the little things I've learned to do and not to do when creating a story, and just focus. Operate within certain parameters, ground myself. The Apex Amis is a story of discipline for myself, and it really does show a level of maturity in my storytelling. Now we are moving on to the fourth character that I've got slated to talk about today. This is one of the most important characters I've ever made. One of the most prolific. If you know me as a person, you've met this character before. You've seen drawings of them, or you've seen the life-size replica I've built of them, which is pretty insane for me to say. So this is one of those characters where, as important as they are to me, I coined a new term in this recent week. I used the term uber dark. You know, like, there's people who are like, oh, I've got this really dark story, it's very edgy, it's not for everyone, and stuff like that. And for me, I kind of have to, like, you know, like, characterize these more grim stories that I have. Like, there are some stories that are pretty dark, or some stories that are pretty kind of borderline mean-spirited, or some stories are really gruesome, and I like to sort those out. Not to say all stories fall in that category. Some are really fun and enjoyable, but many of them take on a darker, more edgy tendency. But there are some arcs, some stories I have to categorize under uber dark. They get so bad that I have to withhold details on the full story. Instead of just like saying, hey, read the story, see how you like it. Like, it gets pretty damn terrible. So anyways, without disclosing too much, here she is. This is Lucy, aka the Automaton, and here she is. This is one of those cases of a character where I had the idea in my head, and I built them from that idea. So this is not a Pollock principle creation. This is a character where I've got an idea, and I know exactly what to do with them, and I built from there. So this whole thing about Lucy, I could go on. I could do a full committed 30-minute video on this, maybe an hour long, but to keep it short, Lucy was based on a real-life bizarro tragedy of Elena Hoyos, who was a real woman who lived in like the early 1900s. And you'll find many YouTube videos on this story, so you can look that up if you want, but to keep it within a few sentences, this was a woman who had tuberculosis, and she saw a doctor named Carl Tanzler. She passed away, and Carl Tanzler was unable to save her. But 10 years later, roughly, maybe a hair less, some kids were looking through this doctor's the window of his house, and are like, oh, he's dancing with someone. I didn't know that he was married. I didn't know that he had a girlfriend or anything. He was kind of a shifty weirdo. Strange that he's dancing with anybody. So people started investigating, started asking questions like, who are you living with right now? And it came to the point where Elena Hoyos' sister, again, Elena's been dead for like a decade now, she takes it upon herself to investigate Carl Tanzler, and upon busting into his house, she and some feds discover the preserved corpse of Elena. Now, again, because this is an uber dark territory, normally I'd be like, oh, here's some pictures of the actual body. But if you really want to see it, you can look it up. It's readily available on Google if you want to go ahead and find it. There are images of this body online. It's been like coated in wax and stuff. It's been so processed, it doesn't even look like a corpse anymore. It's really bizarre. But anyways, I saw a documentary of that story when I was maybe a little too young. Again, my mother being the person who showed me all the dark stuff when I was a kid. She left me with this documentary alone, watched it to take it in as I could, a young feeble mind, and I was there to kind of just digest it myself. And then part of me was like, what if Elena had insurgency over the situation post-mortem? What if she was able to act in response to this crazy situation? So that's how Lucy the Automaton came to be. So you got a crazy, like, clockmaker, falls in love with a woman, she dies, he brings her back to life with clockwork. But it's not a cute, quaint little love story. It's not at all heartwarming. She comes back to life in this machine, and not only that, there's like split personality. There's that really horrible monster lurking inside, but there's also this subtle resonance of Lucy living within. And throughout the story, she's trying to fight between these two personalities. What the hell is she supposed to be? And I've only written the first of 3 parts of this story. I've written the first part twice. I've written it initially in 2015, 2016, and then I rewrote it again as a college piece, kind of rework it, inject some new themes that I've, again, kind of learned after high school and through college, now that I was studying my philosophy degree and all that. I wanted to be a little bit more interesting and just a little bit more deep probing. But I guess I kind of shot myself in the foot, because now there's 2 versions of the story, and in my head I'm like, which is the definitive one to read, right? But anyways, that's all aside from the point. The main thing about this character that I realized, I guess this kind of does go back to the whole Pollock principle, is that I started thinking about this character very later on in life, after that initial story was written, and I was thinking about, there were actually connections between me and Lucy and the way that I wrote her that I wasn't really intending. It just happened naturally. Again, as we talked about on this channel, I was diagnosed with autism shortly before my writing renaissance, as I call it. And this was a character who had like a major reality crisis. They were living in a basement, pacing back and forth, not sure what to do with themselves. And then looking back on the story after I wrote it, years after I wrote it in college, I was like, wow, I too was also hit with a reality crisis. I was living in a basement, walking back and forth, not sure what to do with myself. My whole life, immediately after the diagnosis, directly informed this story as I was writing it. Didn't even realize that, though. So I found that genuinely fascinating. And obviously Lucy lived through a much greater extreme than I was. I wasn't trapped in a basement, okay? I want to make that clear. This wasn't a Stockholm Syndrome situation or anything. Just the basement in my home was kind of all I really knew. I didn't have a whole lot of friends or anything. I didn't really go out on huge adventures on my own. I still did a lot of fun stuff with my folks, but otherwise I was just in my basement, just creating and thinking. And that's where a lot of the early seeds of my creative renaissance peaked in. And that's where Lucy comes into play. Yeah, and then I guess to tease like her future, eventually she does leave the basement, then she kind of lives in the sewers, and her memories come back, and she starts to remember her past life. She had a daughter who lost her mother and didn't know what happened to her, and that goes on many other tangents. Maybe one day we'll just do a video dedicated to the story of Lucy, because again, there's 2 versions of the first part, but as for the later 2 parts, part 2 and part 3, they live on in outline form only, in summary form. So if we want to just talk about the story of Lucy, I would love to do that. So let me know what you think. But that being said, we have one more character to talk about. And if you're familiar with me or this channel at all, you might have a hunch about who they are. So as I said in this video, I wasn't sure how I was going to order all the characters as I'm explaining all of them, but there was one where I knew I have to save her for the end. I've talked about her before, so I'll talk about her in short. So going back to the autism diagnosis I had in 2014, I was in a very dark place. That's where, Lucy came about. That's where Mr. Rotten came about. I started to revisit the Apex Amist. That only happened because of this other character that I had to talk about. The thing about the diagnosis is I became creatively bankrupt. I couldn't make a character, do a drawing to save my life. I was stuck. I couldn't make things anymore. And that was one of the most grim points in my life, where I was just trapped. I didn't know what to do with myself. And again, this is before all the other characters I talked about on this list, more or less, if you'd call it that. But then, again, I did a whole video committed to this. On February 14th, Valentine's Day of 2015, I had a really crazy, wild, psycho bonkers dream. And I woke up at precisely 8 a.m. that morning. I dropped right to the floor of my bedroom, and then I had 3 pieces of loose leaf paper. I scribbled down everything I could remember. And within, I think, 2 weeks, it became my very first short story. 20 pages of nonsense insanity. Just reading off the dream, word for word, trying to make it as coherent as I could. And it has not aged well. It's a very strange and bizarre tale. But because of this dream, I was able to create again. Lucy was able to happen. Mr. Rotten was able to happen. I was able to revisit the Apex Amist along with Glacio, who's a whole other character who I could talk about another time. He's another big totem within the lore, if I'm to put it that way. So the main subject of this story, called Rails, I didn't mention that before, it was called Rails. The main character of this story was Candace. Without Candace, I wouldn't be talking to you today. I'll be blunt with you. I probably would not be alive. That's how important this character is to me. She exists in a lot of different forms. I've drawn her many, many times. And there aren't a lot of physical things that represent her. This might be one of 2 or 3. But at some point in college, I actually made a 1/6 scale clay replica of her. I don't know how I did this. I had to build one piece at a time each day, into waiting for pieces to solidify and then build more, going all the way up. And I'm amazed that she stayed in one piece. I've even taken her apart to put her back together just to be sure she'd be more stable. But yeah, this is Candace. She is the character that started the Renaissance, as I call it. And again, I call it the Renaissance because, there were characters that are kind of fledgling when I was a kid. Like Cyberwolf is the very first character I ever made, and I've made feeble attempts to bring him back over time. And Glacio came around, then of course we had the Apex Amis and all of that. And then, again, the high school made me totally creatively bankrupt. I did not know what to do. But then Candace and the Dream gave me a foundation of, here's a way that you can structure your work. Here's a story. Just tell the story. Don't worry about meaning. Don't worry about morals. Don't worry about any of that. Just write it for the sake of writing it. And I guess that goes back to what I was talking about. Again, the Pollock principle, as I'm calling it. I didn't write the story for it to mean anything. I didn't write the story for any sense of purpose. I just wanted to make something to get that thrill again in a new form. And to this day, I say it's one of the weakest things I've ever written. It's really strange. It doesn't make any sense. But the fact that I wrote it at all is such a big deal. This told me you can at least complete something. You can complete something that's meaningful to you, even if it has no inherent meaning in itself, right? There was no outline, really, aside from those 3 pieces of paper, which I still have preserved in an envelope in my records, which is really cool. I wrote it just for writing's sake. And that was the gem of the process, really. And then after that, I'm like, then I'm hearing about the story about this young woman named Elena Hoyos who was preserved in some creepy dude's home. I have this mask that I had since I was a kid. I've been wanting to create a character around that for a long time. How can I do that? I've been building puppets, or at least starting. By that point, maybe only made 3 or 4. How could I tell stories about them? And back to Mr. Rotten, he loops into Candace's canonical story. They're friends with each other in Otherworld. She's the one who gets them out. And then Mr. Rotten joins her and leads all the other puppets back to Earth. That's the whole point of them. So even she didn't... The story that she first appeared in, being Rails, that's not canon at all. That's its own fantastical, what I dare say, call a non-fiction account of how the dream played out. But the dream itself is not canon with the main stories. Otherworld is the canon story for Candace. And then she meets other characters in the timeline later on. Again, those stories where characters meet each other, those are in short supply. Again, most of them, I want stories to be standalone, depending on what theme you want, depending on what characters you want. Whether you prefer uber dark or not, then you can pick and choose your favorite stories and not have to worry about having to read other stuff beforehand, right? But anyways, back to it. This is all to say, I would not have certain ethical principles, certain structures when creating these stories and these characters without this random dream that I just had one Valentine's Day. 10 years ago, almost on the button. I celebrated the 10-year anniversary of that dream this Valentine's Day, 2025. So, big deal, big advent for me. And, again, I've gone into this in more detail, so I'll keep it brief here. But since it's been 10 years since that dream, I've been writing ever since to create a system for myself, to keep myself upright. That's proof to me that the system works. I'm able to create these characters, to learn more about myself, to take all these little philosophical principles, people that I really love in life, people that I really hate in life, and create a character that represents them, a story that represents them. Kind of almost tie it all together and put it in a format that I understand more through my lens, how I view it, right? Like, for example, going back to the Apex Amazon Brostum, there's no city like Brostum in real life. At least I hope there's not. Riddled with crime, a lot of death, uber dark concepts I'm not going to talk about here. But that's how I viewed the world during that time in high school. That's not how I view the world now at all. But now I'm like, yeah, I don't no longer endorse this world, but it could be a really interesting story. So again, you let things cook for a little while, just on the back burner, and then you see what they become later. Like, I once wrote down somewhere in my archives, I almost describe it as planting trees. You know, you plant a tree, you're like, cute little tree, alright, let's see what this becomes. Then you move on to another tree, you make that grow, you water it, you go back to another tree, you're like, oh, this one needs a little more water, I'll keep pouring onto that. Go back to another tree, this one died. I don't know why I'm not doing anything with it. So you pass on it. You go back to another tree, you're like, holy shit, it's so tall. This thing's amazing. And then that represents when you have the experiences necessary to make something with meaning. I didn't have that when I had the dream. I didn't have that when I first made Mr. Rotten, or Lucy even. That's why I had to write her story twice, I felt like, for whatever reason. But now, I can return to roots. I've got what I need to start my first novel, and I'm over midway through it, and I'm still adding more concepts into it that don't corrupt the overall narrative, just to supplement it and to make it better. And if I tried doing that earlier, I wouldn't have the right tools, I wouldn't have the right experiences to do it. So, anyways, I could keep prattling on, but that's it. Those are five only of all the characters that I've made. All very important to me for very different reasons. Some go all the way back to elementary school, but again, this video probably wouldn't exist because of Shada, who only really had a concrete identity in the past week. Well, that's simple. But I love her character a lot. She could be one of the mains going forward. She could be a lot more important in side stories I do in the future. Whether it be in a year, 5 years, however long it could take it. This is my way of life, and it's so goddamn important to me. But at the heart of it all are the characters. Each one of them representing things that I've learned. They don't exist just to be fun very often. Again, I just create them because they feel right. Not because I have a mission, just because they feel correct in the world, because I feel like they deserve to have a story told. And then when I look back on that finished product, no matter how rough or refined it might be, I could say, this character symbolizes something. And then when people learn about these characters, whether it be because I actually managed to publish something and people read it, or I get hit by a double-decker bus, and then people are going through all my shit when I have all this stuff to leave behind, and then I have a whole bunch of fail-safes and backups so they can discover my work and figure out what it all means. People can look into my records and go, this character is kind of interesting, what do you think it means? And then you can share it. That's the point of artwork. It never has a concrete definition. Everyone who looks at a piece of artwork, whether it be Mona Lisa, Statue of Liberty, Eiffel Tower, Starry Night, The Scream, like classic pieces of art, they don't exist because they only have one meaning. That's not the point of art. You look at characters, you look at images, colors, so you can create your own meaning. And if you do that, and other people do that on their own, imagine how expansive humankind can become. Artwork's incredible, but the way I do it is through character development. That is the heart of everything that I do. The fact that there are names, faces, or lack thereof, and the fact that they each have something to tell you. And you can take whatever you want from that. So that's really it for this video. Again, I could keep going. I'm obviously very passionate, borderline, well, definitely obsessed with this whole process. But if you have any comments or questions or anything at all, go ahead and drop it down there. If you would like me to go in depth on any of the characters I've shown off and or mentioned in this video, I could make a whole freaking video to it. Believe me, I can. I could dip into my records and give you the whole goddamn history on them. And also, if you're an artist yourself, let me know what you've done, and let me know how you view art and what you like about art, even if you don't make art yourself. Just what's your philosophy on that? And also on just characters and what they do for you, fictional characters that you love or that you've made yourself. Let me know. I'm curious to know. So thank you guys very much. I really love what this channel is doing. Again, it's a new video every single time, new topic every single time. I know that I don't get a whole ton of views. I don't care. I just love the fact that they're out there, and the few people who do find them, I hope they do something valuable for them, and they learn something, and then they can teach me something. And if I could just strike the curiosity of a single person out there, I could die happy. So Thank you guys very much for listening. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time.